Long before the first European ship touched the Atlantic shore, the land that would one day be called Delaware was a world of forests, rivers, and marshes teeming with life. For thousands of years, indigenous peoples lived here generations before maps or borders. Along the tidal waters of the Delaware River and Bay, the Lenape people built their villages, hunted deer, fished shad, and traded shells and furs with tribes to the north and west. They called the river Lenapewihituk the River of the Lenape. Their society was deeply tied to the rhythm of the seasons. Families moved between summer fishing camps and winter hunting grounds, guided by knowledge passed down for centuries. Governance was based on kinship and consensus. The Lenape respected the land not as property, but as a living relation. Further south lived the Nanticoke people, whose villages lay along the river that still bears their name. They, too, lived by the water fishing, cultivating corn and squash, and crafting dugout canoes to travel the bay. When the first Europeans appeared over the horizon in the early 1600s, the Lenape and Nanticoke saw not conquerors, but curious traders. The first to arrive were Dutch explorers, sailing for the merchants of the powerful Dutch West India Company. In 1609, Henry Hudson sailed into the Delaware Bay during his search for a passage to Asia. He recorded the waters as deep and promising, but he did not linger. A few years later, Dutch traders returned, naming the river Zuid Rivier, the South River, to complement their North River, the Hudson. In 1610, English Captain Samuel Argall entered the bay, and in honor of the Virginia Company's governor, named it for Thomas West, Lord Delaware. That name, Delaware, would eventually be applied to the river, the bay, and the land itself. But for decades, European control was uncertain. The first serious attempt to settle the region came not from England or Holland, but from an unexpected place, Sweden. In 1638, a small expedition led by Peter Minuit, a former Dutch governor of New Amsterdam, sailed up the Delaware River with Swedish and Finnish colonists. They built Fort Christina, near what is now Wilmington. This was the birth of New Sweden, a short-lived but remarkable experiment in colonial life. The settlers of New Sweden brought log cabin building techniques from Scandinavia, a style that would spread across the American frontier in later centuries. They traded peacefully with the Lenape, exchanging metal tools and cloth for beaver pelts. For a time, this Swedish foothold thrived in relative quiet, but to the Dutch, the Swedes were trespassers on territory they claimed as part of New Netherland. In 1651, Dutch Governor Peter Stuyvesant established Fort Casimir just downriver from Fort Christina, a move meant to assert Dutch dominance. 3 years later, he returned with soldiers, seized the Swedish settlements, and absorbed New Sweden into New Netherland. The Swedish colonists, however, were allowed to stay, and their families blended into the multicultural frontier society that followed. By the mid-1600s, the Delaware Valley had become a crossroads of European ambition. The Dutch claimed it, the Swedes farmed it, and the English eyed it. Across the ocean, kings and companies debated who owned this patch of forest and river, while the Lenape and Nanticoke watched their homeland divided on paper. In 1664, England made its move. A fleet sent by the Duke of York sailed into the harbor of New Amsterdam and forced its surrender. Within months, New Netherland became New York, and with it, the English gained control of the Delaware region. The Duke of York granted this territory to his loyal allies, but boundaries were hazy, and neighboring colonies, particularly Maryland and Pennsylvania, would soon dispute the same land. Under English rule, the region that would become Delaware was known as the Three Lower Counties on the Delaware. Though technically under the authority of the Duke of York, these counties, Newcastle, Kent, and Sussex, developed their own local character. Newcastle, with its deep harbor, became the main port and administrative center. Kent was agricultural and rural. Sussex, largely frontier land, was filled with scattered farms and dense forests. In 1681, a Quaker named William Penn received a vast land grant from King Charles II. The king owed Penn's father a debt, and instead of money, He paid it with land, what would become Pennsylvania. But Penn quickly realized that his new colony had one major problem: no direct access to the sea. For his holy experiment to thrive, he needed a port. The Duke of York solved that problem by giving Penn control of the 3 lower counties along the Delaware River. It was a political favor and a source of endless confusion. Although governed by Penn, these counties maintained a separate identity from Pennsylvania proper. The people here were a mix of Dutch, Swedes, English, and Quakers, and they valued their independence. Penn, for his part, tried to govern both Pennsylvania and the lower counties as one entity, but it was never easy. The cultures were too different, the interests too divided. The residents of the lower counties demanded their own assembly, and by 1704, they achieved it. While they shared a governor with Pennsylvania, they had separate legislatures. This was the first step toward Delaware's eventual independence. Life in the early 1700s Delaware was a blend of old and new worlds. Towns like Newcastle and Lewes bustled with trade grain, lumber, and tobacco moving through the river ports. The countryside filled with small farms and villages. Religion was diverse. Quakers, Anglicans, Lutherans, and Presbyterians all worshipped in their own meeting houses. Slavery, unfortunately, was also part of the system. Both African and native enslaved people labored in fields and households. Still, compared to its neighbors, Delaware was a place of moderation. Its Quaker influence brought tolerance and a degree of equality rare in other colonies. The people here valued community, hard work, and self-government. By the mid-1700s, they had begun to think of themselves not as Pennsylvanians or English subjects, but as Delawareans. When conflict erupted between Britain and France in the 7 Years' War, Delaware's men fought under the British flag. But the taxes and trade restrictions that followed victory in 1763 soured colonial loyalty. The Stamp Act, the Townshend Acts, and other impositions from London stirred resentment even in the quiet river towns. Local assemblies debated, merchants protested, and pamphlets spread revolutionary ideas. Among Delaware's rising patriots were men who would soon become national figures: Caesar Rodney, Thomas McKean, and George Red. All 3 would sign the Declaration of Independence, but their path to that moment was anything but certain. Delaware was a small colony, balanced between North and South, with strong ties to both Pennsylvania and Maryland. Many here preferred peace with Britain. Others saw independence as the only way forward. By the early 1770s, the Delaware River had become not just a highway of trade, but a corridor of revolution. News from Boston, Philadelphia, and Virginia flowed through its ports. The colonies were awakening to a shared cause, and the people of Delaware were being drawn into it, whether they wished to or not. Tensions mounted. Committees of correspondence formed to coordinate resistance. Local militias drilled on the village greens. Across the bay, British ships patrolled, watching, waiting. In the summer of 1776, the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia to debate independence. Delaware sent 3 delegates: Rodney, Red, and McKean. The vote was deadlocked. McKean for independence, Red against, and Rodney absent, home sick in Dover. The colony's decision hung by a thread. When McKean realized the importance of the moment, he sent an urgent message to Rodney. Through rain and darkness, Rodney rode nearly 80 miles overnight, arriving just in time to cast Delaware's decisive vote for independence. His vote broke the tie, and Delaware joined the movement to create a new nation. That moment, one man's ride through a storm, symbolized the transformation of Delaware from a quiet coastal colony to a state at the heart of America's birth. In 1776, as Caesar Rodney dismounted his horse in Philadelphia, drenched from the storm, he carried not just the voice of his colony but the will of a people ready to stand on their own. Delaware's vote for independence was small in scale but immense in consequence. For the first time, the people of the Delaware counties had acted as one, not as dependents of Pennsylvania or subjects of Britain, but as a separate entity with a destiny of its own. That same year, the colony officially adopted the name the Delaware State. A new constitution was written, and the state established its own government, declaring its full independence not just from the crown, but from any claim by Pennsylvania. Delaware's first president, as the office was then called, was John McKinley, a physician and patriot from Newcastle. But independence did not come easily. The Revolutionary War was harsh on Delaware. Its small population meant its militia was limited in number. Yet Delaware soldiers quickly earned a reputation for discipline and courage. The Delaware Regiment, known as the Blue Hens Chickens, a nickname said to come from the fighting gamecocks bred by Delaware's men, became famous across the Continental Army for its steadfastness in battle. At Couch's Bridge, in September 1777, Delaware troops engaged British and Hessian forces in the only major battle fought on Delaware soil. Though the Americans were forced to retreat, they fought fiercely. It is believed that this battle marked the first use of the new Stars and Stripes flag in combat. British troops soon occupied Wilmington and Newcastle, using the Delaware River as a supply route. Farms were raided, property was seized, and local families suffered. Yet despite these hardships, the state remained committed to the revolutionary cause. Delaware's leaders balanced the need for order with the drive for liberty, ensuring that their government functioned even as war raged nearby. When the war ended in 1783, Delaware was small but stable. It had endured invasion and occupation without losing its sense of unity. The experience of war strengthened its identity as a distinct state, and so, when delegates met to form a stronger national government a few years later, Delaware again led from the front. On December 7, 1787, Delaware became the first state to ratify the United States Constitution. It earned its enduring title, the First State. In the early years of the new nation, Delaware remained modest in size and influence, but rich in civic spirit. Its leaders supported the new federal system and worked to ensure that small states retained equal representation in Congress, a principle that shaped the U.S. Senate itself. Economically, Delaware transitioned from a colonial frontier to an agricultural hub. Its fertile soils produced grain and vegetables for nearby cities, while its rivers powered mills and shipyards. The Brandywine River, in particular, became a center of early American industry. It was along that river, in 1802, that a young French immigrant named Eleuthère Irénée Dupont established a gunpowder mill. His company, E1, Dupont de Nemours and Company, would become one of the most significant industrial enterprises in American history. What began as a modest powder mill would, over time, evolve into a global chemical and materials giant, eventually giving Delaware a new identity as a center of innovation. Throughout the early 19th century, Delaware's towns grew around this industrial base. Wilmington flourished as a manufacturing hub. The Chesapeake and Delaware Canal opened in 1829, linking the two Great Bays and boosting trade between Philadelphia and Baltimore. Newcastle, Dover, and Georgetown remained quieter centers of agriculture and local governance. Delaware also occupied a complicated position on the issue of slavery. Though it was a slave state, its number of enslaved people was small compared to its southern neighbors. Many Delawareans, influenced by Quaker ideals and northern proximity, supported gradual emancipation. By the time of the Civil War, Delaware had only a few hundred enslaved persons left, yet it remained loyal to the Union. When the Civil War erupted in 1861, Delaware stood at a crossroads geographically and politically. It was one of the border states, wedged between North and South, slave and free. Despite strong Southern sympathies among some citizens, the state legislature voted against secession. Delaware remained in the Union, providing troops and support to the federal cause. Over 13,000 Delawareans served in the Union Army. They fought in some of the bloodiest battles of the war: Antietam, Gettysburg, and Petersburg. The state's loyalty to the Union preserved its unity, but the war left scars. Families were divided by politics and allegiance, and the question of race and equality lingered for generations. After the war, Delaware faced the challenges of Reconstruction without the devastation that struck the Deep South. Yet it resisted rapid change. The state did not ratify the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendments until decades later, long after they had become law nationwide. Racial segregation and disenfranchisement persisted well into the 20th century. Meanwhile, Wilmington grew into an industrial powerhouse. The DuPont Company expanded into chemicals, textiles, and materials that would define the 20th century. Railroads connected Delaware's ports to markets across the East Coast. The state's small size proved an advantage, easy to manage, efficient to govern, and strategically placed between two major cities, Philadelphia and Baltimore. By the turn of the century, Delaware had become a study in contrasts. Its southern counties, Kent and Sussex, remained rural, rooted in agriculture and small towns. Its north, anchored by Wilmington, was modern and industrial. The divide between these regions shaped Delaware's politics and identity for generations. During the World Wars, Delaware played a vital role. DuPont's factories produced explosives, synthetic materials, and wartime supplies. Thousands of Delaware men and women served in the armed forces. Shipyards along the Delaware River built vessels for the Navy. The state's location, midway along the Atlantic coast, made it a key logistical hub. After World War II, Delaware entered a new era of prosperity. Suburban communities spread outward from Wilmington. Highways and bridges connected the state more closely to the regional economy. Agriculture modernized, and poultry farming became a major industry in southern Delaware. One of Delaware's most defining developments came not from its farms or factories, but from its laws. In the mid-20th century, the state began cultivating a business-friendly legal environment. Its Court of Chancery, known for expertise in corporate law, attracted companies seeking stable and predictable regulation. By the late 1900s, Delaware had become the corporate home of America, the state where more than half of all publicly traded U.S. companies would choose to incorporate. This transformation gave Delaware a unique place in the modern economy. Though small in land and population, it became central to the business world. The names of corporations that technically reside in Delaware, though they may never operate a single factory there, fill entire registries. This blend of legal tradition, stability, and economic pragmatism made Delaware a quiet powerhouse of commerce. But Delaware's story is not only about corporations and industry. It's also about community, resilience, and change. In the 1950s, Delaware became part of the national struggle for civil rights. The Gebhardt versus Belton case, arising from Delaware schools, became one of the 5 cases consolidated into Brown versus Board of Education in 1954, the Supreme Court decision that struck down racial segregation in public schools. Delaware's courts had already ruled in favor of black students seeking equal education, showing that even in a small state, justice could lead the nation. Through the turbulent 1960s and 70s, Delaware adapted to the changing currents of American life. Industrial decline challenged Wilmington, but new businesses emerged in finance, chemicals, and technology. The Delaware Memorial Bridge, opened in 1951, symbolized the state's growing connection to the wider world. Politically, Delaware became known for moderation and bipartisanship, a place where cooperation mattered more than conflict. Its leaders, including Senator Joe Biden, reflected that pragmatic tradition. Delaware's small communities fostered a sense of closeness rare in American politics. Its citizens often felt they truly knew the people who represented them. Into the 21st century, Delaware continued to evolve. The global economy shifted, DuPont merged and restructured, and new industries like banking, healthcare, and logistics rose in importance. Yet the state preserved its identity, a blend of old-world charm and modern efficiency. From the cobblestone streets of Newcastle to the quiet fields of Sussex, from the Brandywine Mills to the high-rises of Wilmington's financial district, Delaware's past is ever present. It's seen conquest and independence, industry and innovation, struggle and progress, all on a strip of land barely 100 miles long. Today, Delaware remains the first state, not only by order of ratification, but in the example it set, a state that values independence, reason, and quiet strength. Its history reminds us that greatness is not measured by size but by character. From the Lenape villages by the river to the boardrooms of the 21st century, Delaware's journey tells a simple truth that even the smallest places can shape the destiny of a nation. And as the story of America continues to unfold, Delaware's legacy endures steadfast, enduring, and proud to have been first. If you enjoyed this journey through time, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that uncover the real history behind the world we live in today.